Welcome to the Lawyering Peace interview series, where we explore the art of diplomacy and the legal frameworks that underpin peace processes. Join us as we hear from prominent figures who have played pivotal roles as lawyers, negotiators, and diplomats in the quest for peace. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Williams, the founder and president of the Public International Law and Policy Group, and the Rebecca Grazier Professor of Law and International Relations at American University. Today, I am so delighted to be joined by the highly accomplished Hind Kabawat. Hind is the Director of Interfaith Peacebuilding at the Center for World Religions, Diplomacy, and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. She is also the president of Taskakel, a nonprofit women-led peacebuilding organization of diverse Syrian women working in pursuit of democracy, justice, human rights, and the rule of law in Syria. Hind has played pivotal roles in the Syrian peace negotiations, including serving as the deputy head of the Syrian Negotiation Committee's office in Geneva and as a former member of the High Negotiations Committee. Hind, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. And it's my absolute pleasure to be here with you. And I very appreciate your hosting me today.
Now, Hind, before we dive into the specifics of the negotiations and your involvement, could you provide some context on the Syrian conflict leading up to the peace talks? What were the factors that set the stage for the negotiations in which you participated?
Thank you, Paul. Syria has been a dictatorship for over 50 years, starting with Hafiz Assad and then passing on his son. So I grew up in Damascus. I attended school there. We experienced various forms of oppression, censorship, one-party rule, corruption, imprisonment, and detention for those who opposed the regime, as well as lack of social justice and the human rights abuses. So when the Arab Springs began in Tunisia and Egypt, the Syrian people witnessed it on TV and traveled the street to demand political reform, democracy, and freedom. I distinctly recall hearing a demonstration in Damascus calling for freedom for the first time and seeing the word written on the wall near my home in the old city of Damascus, freedom. This was beautiful. Beautiful demonstrations led by youth of Syria who dreamed of living in dignity. However, Bashar Assad's regime reacted violently to this peaceful demonstration. So my young student then and the intellectuals from a diverse group were in these demonstrations. And quickly, this escalated to a violent conflict, which led a massive humanitarian crisis with millions of refugees and internally displaced persons. We call them IDPs, sieges, famine, and forced displacement. I have to say that the first time I visited the refugee camp in Kilis in Turkey, in the South Turkey, in 2012, and also the refugee camp in Lebanon, I cried so hard. I cried for me, for my Syrian people who welcomed the refugees from Iraq, Sudan, and Lebanon into our homes over the years to become refugees in this camp. It really hurts. So it's all led, of course, for rise of the extremist group targeting civilian people and civil society activists, the same as the regime. Here I have to say that many of my colleagues were killed and kidnapped by both Syrian government and extremist military groups. Also, many Syrian activists died under tortures in the Syrian regime's prisons. And you can quickly check the Caesar files to know how horrible the crimes were. So the chemical attacks on Ghouta, it is a city near Damascus where 100 Syrian people died. today, it's marked the 11th anniversary of the attacks from the Assad regime on the civilians. So this ongoing attacks on civilians with barrel bombs and others, it was all the outcomes of this demonstration and the violent attack from the regime.
Now, Hind, at some point, the international community became heavily involved, and Geneva was selected as the venue for these peace negotiations. You participated in all 8 rounds of the Geneva talks. Can you share with our listeners how you came to play such a pivotal role in these negotiations? What's your personal story, building upon what you've just said, and how did you end up in Geneva?
I don't like to talk about myself. So I worked for many years in peace building, Paul, and have been part of several dialogues group, tracks 1, 2, and 3, interface dialogue. It's my DNA. And over the years and before the revolution. But professionally also, as a lawyer, I gained experience as part of the international negotiation team in my international law firm in Toronto. It made it easier then. When we had the meeting in Riyadh 1 in 2015, I think it is December 2015, and run to be a member of the High Negotiation Committee, I got elected and became a member. So believe me, I believed, Paul, very much that I could use my experience and knowledge to serve the cause and the cause for my people, because I want them to achieve peace. So I become a member of the political independent bloc in this high negotiation committee.
And how did the other members of the delegation perceive you, Hind, as a lawyer? We'll subsequently talk about your role representing women's interests and women's constituencies in the delegation team. But first, let's talk about how they perceived you as a lawyer and what value did they see you as bringing to the table as their lawyer.
For us, we were more there looking, this is the time when they look at us more as a politician. So as a woman politician, more than a lawyer, but the lawyer was an added value, so I can help in helping with the document, helping with other aspects. But for them, the main important things to be there as a politician. But then, of course, I use my knowledge, especially in the mediations, to help in the legal department.
And how did you couple that with your gender, being one of the high-profile women on the negotiating committee? What were some of the advantages? And candidly, what were some of the disadvantages? And how did you structure your role and your engagement in order to maximize your personal representation of women and women's interests?
Never easy for a woman to work in a political environment, especially in the Middle East. It is in the world. It's very difficult. So it's always a difficult. So we have to work extra to put more effort, and more important, to be very strong and have the thick skins to be more resilient and stronger, and to prepare more, and to be able to, when they will be attacking you in any way, you have to be more resilience for this. So it wasn't easy, Paul, for me to be a woman in this environment, especially this is in 2016, when being a woman and in a negotiation, it's just like, especially coming from a legal background and civil society background, where I've been surrounded by old politicians and armed groups, it was very difficult.
Did you find that there was adequate support from the international community in terms of the mediators, the facilitators? Did they play an adequate role in helping to empower women's voices? And what could they have done better?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. They tried to help in the beginning. And for us initially, Paul, what happened? We have 2 women were in the high-level negotiation, and then the 2 women in the negotiation team, which I felt was a significant representation. So to address this I propose, with the help of my colleagues and my international supporters, to create a women consulting group to compromise for 12 women from diverse backgrounds and expertise and ethnicities. It was challenging to persuade our team of the importance of their presence, the woman presence here. And I emphasize that they can bring valuable ideas and demands directly from the affected community. Of course, our male colleagues want to reject these ideas. They didn't want it. They always often questioned their presence. But yes, the international community, the mediators helped us to push, and we proved to everybody the importance of the presence of the woman. And this is, and especially what we did, we start really walk the talk. So we organize so many events, and alongside to the Geneva talks to advocate for the refugees affairs, to the humanitarian concern and the detainees from a woman perspective. So this give our team credibility that we are connected to the ground. Plus, the international community did see that we are credible, and we force our colleagues to see the importance of having women in Geneva at the table, how important it is. And don't forget, also, Paul, we have problems also because of this representation. We pushed, and we have the other issue was to establish quotas for women at all levels in Syria. It was very challenging with our high negotiation committee. So, of course, also with support of my colleagues from women organizations and the international community, we advocate for at least 30% women representations. And eventually we succeeded after heavy duty negotiations with our male colleagues, because we all believe that having women present at the negotiation table and the perspective they bring can be highly significant. Because we know that the research shows that any peace agreement involving women negotiators will likely result in more sustainable peace and more success. And we can see this. We witness this, that all my female colleagues and us, we constantly prioritize thinking about the future, focusing on peace building, transitional justice, education, and job opportunities. So it was tough battles. We did it so far. Now we can see that there will be no more meetings with any officials without women representation. There will be no delegation without women, but also we always make sure that women there, she's not only window dressing, but she has a role, and they have to give her a role to play.
And Hind, I think that's a very important point, because sometimes we see that they'll bring in marginalized populations, women, other marginalized populations, as you say, window dressing, and say, okay, we have our percentage. I've noticed in various negotiations that I've worked that over time, the value of diverse participation, and in particular, women, dawns on the other members of the delegation at some point in time. Can you talk a little bit about your male colleagues or other colleagues on the delegation, and at what point did they realize, oh, this isn't just window dressing. There are actually very important perspectives and value that's being added. And we may actually, if we get an agreement, have a more durable agreement because of Hind's participation and her colleagues. Did that happen fairly quickly, and why and how did it happen?
Now, of course, it didn't happen quickly, and it was always complication. But what we do, there is no easy way here. It's been to work very hard on this. So I remember a story that I visited refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan as part of my civil society. And this allowed me, of course, to directly communicate with the refugees, especially the women, establish good relation with them. So before the Geneva round, I was there and I spent one day there. It was memorable visit to Talibia refugee camp near Amman, Jordan. So the entire day with the women, we discussed the negotiation priority and what is important for them. So we brought their demands with 70 women signatures. They wrote and signed a powerful statement to demand an immediate ceasefire, release of detainees, right of return to their home, and support of their livelihood, include access to good education. When we brought this statement with the 70 women signatures, and they're women from the refugee camp, and they did see the demand, this is when they nod their head saying, yeah, there is a good voice. And those voices, we cannot hide it. And this is the point. We cannot just sit down and talk. We should go to the field and work and bringing the voice. So we always work double than anybody else. So every single member, they finish their work and go. For us, we go to the grassroots, to the women organization, to civil society, to bring their perspective to the table. This is what's the different women can bring. We bring the voice of the voiceless to the table and to bring the perspective for them to have a better future.
Because you have the access to grassroots, you have the access to 50% of the population on a very consistent basis. Let's pivot a little bit to the early stages of the negotiations in Geneva. And what were some of your initial impressions of the negotiation process? You know, the way it was structured, the way it was mediated. And are there any memorable moments from those early days of the peace process?
Actually, from the beginning, we have so much challenges. And the challenges was that in the Middle East, there is misconception that negotiation means giving up. And I think every person can know about Middle Eastern. This is what we think. So the challenge was first to reach an agreement with our team that convince them that in public that we're not bargaining, we're not surrounding. This is a negotiation to bring a solution. So I remember during my first day in Geneva in 2016, for the first Geneva round, the Syrian regime, with the support of Russian, was bombing civilians in Italy. It was very difficult moment. So we were criticized, and I can see this is the first round. There is just have to imagine that they're bombing our country, the city of Idlib. Civilians are dying. And we are there in Geneva to negotiate with those people who are bombing our cities. So we were criticized by other colleagues for negotiation while our people were dying. And many of our colleagues refused to engage in negotiation due to their intense emotion and anger. So indeed, to convey that being in Geneva provided us with a platform. So we needed to convince them that this platform can shed the light on the situation in Idlib and the atrocity committed by the regime. But also, we have to negotiate at the table. So the first impression was a team in very high emotionally taken by the killing of the civilian, which I am with them. But then we need to convince them that we need to negotiate to stop this. So managing emotion and anger was the things we faced in Geneva the first round. It was very difficult. And this is my observations.
Hind, you did quite a bit of preparation for these negotiations. Hopefully and ideally, some of that preparation helped to manage the anger and the frustration of your colleagues. But talk to us a little bit about how you helped your delegation think, prepare, strategize for these negotiations. And I'm particularly interested in asking these questions because, you know, some of my guests who I interview work for governments, and there's a whole infrastructure for preparing for negotiation. But if you're representing the opposition, civil society, and in particular women's interests, how do you prepare for Geneva level negotiations?
Yeah. I know it sounds, when you talk about it, it's something so complicated. We have to prepare. But the first things, remember, we have the 2254, the United Nations Security Council, and it is outlined also the roadmaps for peace process in Syria. It mentioned all this political transition, humanitarian, and whatever. However, before we delve into all this negotiation process and all those files, Paul, we need to focus on building trust within our diverse team, because we have a diverse team which include people from various political background, religions, ethnic group, right wings, left wing, military members, politicians, women. It was very complicated. So one of the priority for strategy to prepare for the negotiation is building trust among us as a team. It's very crucial, especially considering the history of division and mistrust in our country, which stemmed from a dictatorship regime. So you never trust anybody. You cannot trust anybody. Talk loud because you don't want anybody to hear you. So this kind of mistrust, Bill, we need to work on it from the beginning. So we have worked collaboratively to outline our common ground, then the principle and goals, and to try to reach consensus on the type of future state we envision. So we envision the principle of a new constitution, and we envision how we're going to work on the humanitarian issue to save our people, and then the accountability file, which is become very big and very sensitive. So this process allowed us to negotiate as a team before engaging with the other side. So the other side objective was very easy. It is very straightforward. They aim to maintain the current dictatorship and discredit us as a team. So we know what they want. So our task is complex. We aspire to bring about change, freedom and democracy and political transitions, while also addressing the suffering of our people who are enduring famine and detention. So we need also to manage this emotion. And this was particularly very challenging. So while we're not a very complicated government, they have to do a strategy to prepare. We have files to prepare. We have the 2254, but also now we have to do in the same time parallel that building trust and managing emotions while we're doing everything else.
So, Hind, I remember from our time together in Geneva that there was the added complication of the negotiations happening in Switzerland at the Peace Palace in the secure environment of Geneva, and that being contrasted with the barrel bombs and the detentions and the torture in Syria. Now, and this happens in many peace negotiations. So for various reasons, the mediators will select Geneva, LA, or Dayton, Ohio, or wherever for these talks. But that does also cause some tension and some possible erosion of legitimacy. How did you deal with that? And what advice did you share with your colleagues on the delegation for, look, we have to be in Geneva because this is where the talks are being held, but we need to do it optically in such a way that we don't erode our legitimacy with the people back home. How did you navigate that?
This is exactly when we talk about, we have to convince the people that we're not only doing negotiation. Because for them, why you're there, why you're doing negotiation. That's why, Paul, and remember, and you attended so many of those events with your team, when we did the event about the refugees in Lebanon, about the accountability, about the women detention. This is when we get the legitimacy from the people, because they see that we're not only sitting there in a palace, just there to negotiate in an ivory tower, but no, we're doing those side events to get the credibility from the people saying, yes, they are in Geneva, but also they're using that platform to advocate and lobbying for their big cause. So this is also, there is also lots of media against us, but also there is a good media who played very important role to show that those teams are there, and they're not only sitting and trying to negotiate, but also to advocate for our cause.
I want to dive into that in a little more detail, because one of the things that struck me, you and your colleagues brought Syrian voices to Geneva. There was the delegation at the Royal Hotel or the Intercontinental Hotel, but then, as you mentioned, across the street from the Intercontinental Hotel, right next to the UN Peace Palace, there was a venue for these types of regular conversations with survivors, with victims, with women who had experienced atrocities. And you were able to bring those voices to the peace process, and in part because the venue was Geneva. And I think the mediators were quite perplexed. A few others were like, wait a second, this is really amazing and impactful. But walk us through your thinking of how you literally brought grassroots voices to Geneva to be adjacent to and to influence and impact the peace process. Because I think it's a very powerful and impactful lesson for our listeners to hear about.
Yeah, actually, Paul, the most important things for us was to bring track 1, 2, 3 together. For me, grassroots is so important. And in many times in history, when you get only the negotiation in track 1, doesn't work. You need to bring everybody to the table. This is when you get the credibility. So what happened? It's not only, if you remember, even the detainees were from different religions, from different political environment. We brought the far right wing with the far left wings. They were all prisoners, women prisoners, former women prisoners in the Assad regime. This is give a very powerful message, Paul, because look at the regime is even detained an Alawite woman and detained a Muslim conservative woman, a communist, a secular. And it showed that we have so many messages in the same event. If you remember, we talk about the women detainees, we talk about the crimes committed to the people, but also showing that the Assad regime doesn't distinguish between people. They're all together. So we are, as a multi-ethnic, multi-religion society, they were all in the platform sitting together. We're all having one thing to talk about dignity, about freedom to other detainees. And if you remember, we have 2 chairs are empty with the picture because those 2 women, they were tortured to death. We don't know. Later we find out they're dead, but we didn't know where they are. So we put their pictures. This is a very powerful, and they say this is a powerful message for us that women can do it all. This is us as a woman. We brought women from different sides. We brought them all to the table, and they all talking about what happened to them. And then guess what? In the evening, those women, they never talked before together because they're from different parts of the society and different religious group. But this is the same night we had a real peace building in Geneva in one of the closed rooms. This is the time when they both cried and they find out that the husband of this woman in the past killed the nephew of this woman, but both of them, they were in prison in the same time. This was very powerful. And this is what you make the best of Geneva. It's not only the track 1, you do track 2, you do track 3, you do advocacy, you do lobbying, you do everything. And who can do this? Only women can do this because we're multitaskers and we got all this energy and we're greedy. We want everything to the people. And we're not looking for a position or a title or a political future. No. We're looking to the best for our people.
That's a very valuable perspective, because oftentimes folks will talk about inclusion in track 1, which is important. It can't just be the guys with guns. You need women, civil society, marginalized populations. But then they think, okay, we have representation in track 1, we're good. But as you say, track 2, track 3, this all needs to be adjacent to and impacting and amplifying the voices into track one. And I think all too often people think, oh no, we've got our 12 people from each side. It's eclectic. Let's have our isolated negotiation. Let's talk a little bit about your perceptions of the mediators, the international community, the friends of, and there was a very complex array of the United Nations facilitating, hosting. You had the London Group of 11, I think it was, which were the friends of the Syrian opposition. You had the Russians, the Americans, which were part of the London Group of 11, were present with Ambassador Ford initially. What was your perception of this configuration? Was it a motley crew, or it was a highly structured framework for negotiations? And how did you not only navigate, but manage the internationals and impact their thinking?
Oh, yeah, Paul. And unfortunately, when you talk about those actors and you list them, each one of them, each stakeholder had their own agenda and their own interests. And regrettably, their interests of the Syrian people were not matching their interests in most of the time. So each actors also support the specific groups or side from the negotiating team, which becomes evident during negotiation. But now, how to navigate? For me and for my others, some of my colleagues, we don't believe in closing any doors. In diplomacy, in negotiation, we have to have all the door opens because we're not there to to look smart. We're there to help and serve. So anyway, I don't want to close any doors. And some people say, oh, this country is against this country. We should take the side. I don't take any side. I don't take any side. I don't take any. For me, I am there, my only boss, one boss, the Syrian people. I don't take any instruction from anybody. I don't take, do this and do that. No. But I'm a diplomat. I leave the door open. I'm polite. I can talk with them. I can pass the message here to there. I can try to get them to talk. And so many times we brought them together because the more they get together and they agree about something, it's good for us. So for us, the problem until now is they don't agree. And once they agree, they have consent together, this is good for us. So for me and for my other colleagues, salute to them who share with me my ideas, we keep the doors open. We talk with everybody. For the people, we do it. And the more we build bridges between those countries and get them to agree, it's good for us.
One of the things that positively impacted the internationals, and I recall being at some of the meetings with the London Group of 11, which was ironically held at the French ambassador's residence in Geneva. So the London group meeting at the French ambassador's residence. But they were very impressed by the fact that the Syrian opposition delegation had a draft. The main issue early on was the transitional governing body, and the Syrian opposition showed up and put a draft on the table. Usually it's the mediators who will do it, or oftentimes the government. In this case, the Assad regime was playing hard to get. But can you talk to us a little bit about your strategies? I know you played a serious role in that, getting the paper for the opposition delegation and getting the opposition delegation to be brave enough, for lack of a better term, to take the initiative and to put their draft on top first. If you could walk us through that story.
Yeah, I remember was in London, and I was there with my other colleagues, and we presented, we call it the vision, actually. So actually, we tried first to come up with shared vision, which was very difficult, as you know, and to agree on considering the diverse team with different political agendas and background. However, we carefully crafted it in 2016, endured also with us in those days. So the visions aim to foster collective understanding and agreement. So we are represented, like you say, in this vision in London. And I was very proud of this because this is part of this vision is the future framework of our country, safeguarding the right of minorities and ethnic group, advocating for and supporting the right of women, and tackling and seizing economic changes and challenges and opportunity. So the great things, Paul, that in this vision, we included other civil society and other organizations to give us their feedback. So after we drafted, we sent it to other civil society. We brought all their, so we get everybody know that they're involved in this vision. They have a part of this. So it's not like bunch of lawyers and mediators just drafted this. No. After we did it, we send it for a feedback. And this is give this vision credibility, give it its values. So each one, the church will say, oh yeah, I remember I give the feedback of this document. Then the imam from the mosque say, oh yeah, I did my feedback. So everybody and each one, like the women group, civil society, interfaith group, mosque, everybody say, we read it before they publish it. They read it before they represent it. We're part of this. And this is when you talk about track 1, to involve them with other tracks like 2 and 3, and they all feel like we're the package and we're all involved in this vision for the future of Syria. So everyone thinks that we're part of this vision and we need to fight to have it and to fulfill this vision in the future. So you don't do and you don't draft your fancy papers away from the people. You do it and you get their consent and you get their feedback. This will give the vision a very valuable national meaning for everybody. So this is not a vision made by some politician. This is our vision.
No, in Hind, I'm so glad you told that story, because oftentimes when we're advising mediators and we'll say, look, you need to have an inclusive process. You need to incorporate the local voices. No, that's too complex. There's too many of them. They all disagree. But you proved the concept, Hind. You proved that you can go talk to a very eclectic group of grassroots stakeholders. And by including them in the process, you get them to a degree, moderate their views, or at least see their voice in the document. Yeah. And that's one reason why the Syrian opposition was so successful in representing the views of the Syrians in Geneva and subsequent rounds, because of that grassroots work, which 9 out of 10 times a mediator will say, that'll complicate my process. I need the guys with guns to reach an agreement. But there's a phenomenal model.
I have to tell you, this process is complicated to the mediator now, but for future it's better, because it will make to fulfill that vision and to make it happen easier, because you get the agreement of everybody before.
If you actually want a durable agreement, you want to get the buy-in of the eclectic representation of the country, of those being affected by the conflict. Let me pivot a little bit. I recall you were highly effective in the team. The Syrian opposition team was highly effective in interacting with the media, both the international media and the Arab media and the Syrian media more specifically. Oftentimes our pro bono clients will think that it's what's happening in the room that is important, or they'll focus on specifically just talking to the local media. But walk us through your strategy and your plan for interacting with and persuading the global media and the Arab media.
First of all, before we started thinking about the media, we recognize that media platforms are funded by various countries, and each which its own agenda and government interest. So, of course, this has a very significant impact on the Syrian people, because there is a few media platform are neutral and professionals. And this is making our work very difficult. But nevertheless, our strategy is never say no. We always know how to choose the media. What is the message? Study your audience, and being very specific, short and sweet, and less is better. Always less is better. But also, we have a severe attack from social media. And this is because there is so many, we have to recognize something. In our work, there is lots of spoilers. Spoilers. And one of those spoilers are the social media, actually, because they can attack you, they can personally attack you, and because they see that you are effective in promoting dialogue and peace. But of course, there is lots of attacks and hate speech and sectarianism. And this is from the spoilers, from the Lord of Wars. There is people, they don't want to have peace. So they can attack you. And sometimes it will be personal, especially us as a woman. We've been targeted by social media, our family. It's been very hard. Our strategy is never answer back. Your work will prove your credibility. They will attack you, attack you, attack you. Then you have your big event for the accountability and for the detainees or for the refugee. You don't answer. Success is the best revenge. You don't answer those people. You continue working because you cannot stop working because you're there. The people at home are dying and you need to protect them. So you cannot stop because of some hate speech. You have to continue. And sometimes you, instead of answering them back, you just put a piece of work, what you're doing with other colleagues to protect the Syrian people. This is the best answer. And then you have to distinguish between the Arab media, between the international media, and you have to study your audience and everything. But the message is clear. You have one boss, the Syrian people. So you don't change that. Your boss is your boss, and you're there to serve and protect. That's it. Everything else is minors.
No, that's a helpful perspective, because I think oftentimes the pro bono clients we work with will change their message depending on the media, but the media shares across the same platform.
You don't change your message.
Unfortunately, the Geneva talks did not end successfully. They broke down, they petered out. Can you walk us through a little bit of the denouement, the ending of the Geneva talks? But how and why did the Geneva talks fail?
Yeah, it failed because, of course, because there is no political will. There is lots of competition between the countries, between the different sides. And this is the time when there is lots of tension between countries. And yes, it hurt me that we ended this eighth round of Geneva. But you know what? I always think that, yes, it's end, but over time, there's lots of numerous individuals have recognized that years of conflict have effectively nurtured a culture of open dialogue. So the people after the eighth round, they're different. They open dialogue, and there is now, they understand that there should be a mutual understanding. And of course, you can see the shift, Paul, between the people. The perspective on negotiation is different than 2016 because there is now more increase of appreciation of the vital role of negotiators in achieving peaceful resolution. It's completely, they changed. They weren't mature. Now they understand. And now they're prevailing the consensus that following prolonged conflict. Of course, you can see now also the result is civil society and women group have become more actively engaged in ongoing discussions surrounding peace. I remember in 2016 when I just mentioned that we need to have civil society at the table, they've been pointing fingers on me and they called civil society as a traitor. Now they are part of this, part of the negotiation. So this is the result of all those years that they are actively now engaged. Additionally, don't forget, there is now a series of structures, dialogue has been established over the year to facilitate ongoing communication between the conflicting party, even behind doors. There is now more people talking about track 1, 2, 3. Before, you're not allowed to say track 2 and 3. Now everybody, it is now, after all those years of conflict, negotiation, you can see now there is a shift of people from the beginning that negotiation is you're a traitor because you're negotiating. Now, why don't we be part of this negotiation? We want to be part of this. And this is something important. Dialogue is better than violence. This is the result.
There's been a socialization of the need to include civil society and have eclectic voices. Now, I remember
Yes.
early days when we talked about helping to prepare the opposition for negotiations. And they said, well, we're not surrendering. I'm like, no, you want to surrender.
Exactly.
Oh, we can't be seen to be preparing for negotiations. That's surrender.
Exactly. The culture is changed. Culture is completely changed.
It's impressive to hear that change in culture, that socialization has occurred. You've been very generous with your time. So just, if I may, two more questions. One of which is, where do you see the peace process heading in Syria? What is the roadmap out of this conflict and a transition to democracy and stability?
I salute my colleagues because they keep trying and we're not going to give up. And the minute we give up and the negotiation close, it's going to be the end. So I think we should, regardless of our pain, we must stand our ground in the face of and this support our position. And regardless of our pain and disappointment, we must preserve in our pursuit of peace. This is very important. And I do remember what Martin Luther King said: true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Therefore, our quest is for justice and enduring peace. And we should be committed. Even we change roles, there will be people now frontline and we are back and vice versa. It doesn't matter. We support each other because our people deserve peace, Paul, and we need to continue and keep fighting the good fight. We cannot give up. And this is the problem. And I know that we have so much to do. And I can tell you now, when everything is at standstill and there is no light at the end of the tunnel, Paul, despite all the effort, we should focus on the people to keep them connected, especially women and youth. And part of my organization, we do work with local mediation, micro peace effort, and maintaining dialogue between different parts, between different religion, ethnic groups, youth, generation dialogue. And you'll see that it is so important. And we need to promote, encourage transitional justice, even without political solution. Because this is important, people to people dialogue, and bring them together for conversation. And when everything deadlocked on the official level, we should have, and the international community, like you said before, they cannot agree on a political solution and has no political will to end the conflict. We should not waste time. We cannot just sit down and watch the failure in front of us. No. We should instead to continue in investing in people. And from past experience, we learned that an agreement without an honest, meaningful dialogue on the ground between the people and preparing the ground for peace deal, it will be only as good as the paper is written on. Because if people, they don't believe in peace, even if Chakwan signed the best agreement, it's nothing. So while everybody they don't know what to do in the Chakwan, it's been very hard, very complicated in politics, we shouldn't stop people to people dialogue and continue this conversation. Because this is what we need to do. This is what we should remember, because we're not here for our titles or political future. Instead, we negotiate to stop the war and to save lives and serve the people.
I think that is as you say, that is the pathway to peace. So whenever the political will does coalesce, you actually have the grassroots support across the diverse population of Syria for that. Let me ask one final question. And Hind, what is your one key takeaway? So many of our listeners for the Lawyering Peace podcast are young professionals or mid-career professionals who are dedicating themselves to peace building, resolving conflict, helping to build a better and a safer world. What one thing do you want them to remember from your life of experience in peace building?
First, of course, I mentioned before, we need to be the voice of the people. But I always say that our work is so difficult because it's saving life and fighting for a better future. But you need to be flexible, knowledgeable, and you need to be a diplomat, mediator, everything in one. So negotiators, people think, oh, negotiators should be like having 6, 7 hats and learn. Every day is a learning about geopolitics, about the other side, and you put yourself into other people's shoes. All this, it's great. But the important is to be flexible, to be open-minded, but also I do want to ask all the negotiators to pass their knowledge and experience to the next generation, to the youth, because they are the future and our hope to continue the hard work we started. And it's hurt me when I see a great negotiator, they go home and they say, that's it, we've finished. No, it's not finished. You go back and teach other young negotiators because they need you. They need your mentoring and they need you to help them because it's hard already there. And you already go through all this hardship. So you need to take care of other young generation. And I wish everybody the best.
Hind, you've been so generous with your time today, but also over the last 15 years that we've worked together. You've always been generous to help educate me on the political context in
And you
Syria.
educate me too, Paul.
Well, we're a couple of lawyers, Hind, so we operate on the same wavelength. It's been a real honor and a privilege over these years to work with you, in part because you do wear so many hats. And in your career, you've been obviously deeply and highly committed to seeking to bring peace to Syria. But for decades before that, you've been working in the field of peace building around the globe. And so it's always so rewarding and refreshing for me to have friends and colleagues like you, Hind, who really do practice peace building globally on the issues that require the expertise from one of your 6 hats that you wear. So I did just want to say thank you, not only for this podcast, which is designed to share knowledge with the next generation, but for the work that you've done over the decades to make the world a more peaceful place.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for everything also you did for us. I remember when you helped us with the gendering our constitutions, it's been a great working, a privilege to work with you, firm, and with you especially. Paul, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Hind.